Welcome to Nonprofit Insider. My name is David Unger, and I'm pleased to be hosting a show with executive directors and key people of local nonprofits. I personally have worked in the nonprofit world, thanks Deb, for over 30 years. In those years, I've realized that the majority of the community does not know about the organizations that provide critical services and benefits to our community that we sometimes take for granted. Nonprofit Insider is a chance to hear about the organizations that touch so many in our community. The opinions expressed on Nonprofit Insider are not necessarily those of WMPG, its staff and underwriters, or of USM. Today, we have Pam Dawson, Executive Director of Hear Me Now. Hi, Pam.
Good afternoon, David.
How are you today?
I'm great, thanks.
Good. Going to the beach after the show?
On my way down to Massachusetts to pick up a family member to bring them back here for the weekend.
There you go. So, you're the Executive Director of Hear Me Now. And I'm sure the majority of our listeners do not know what Hear Me Now is.
I think you're right, unfortunately, which is a sad thing because that's my job for people to know.
Right.
So let me tell you. So Hear Me Now is an organization that gives people with hearing loss, both children and adults, the opportunity to learn to listen and speak as their primary way of communicating, should they choose to do that.
So you're saying that your organization works with individuals who could be totally deaf,
Mm-hmm.
and provide them the opportunity to hear?
That's right. And not only hear, but listen to spoken communication and talk in the hearing world. I've been with Hear Me Now for about 7 years, and prior to that I'd spent pretty much my entire professional career in early childhood special education. Another word for that is early intervention, working with children with disabilities. And had been working in preschool situations where there were kids with all sorts of disabilities that were mainstreamed right into regular classroom settings and receiving the supports that they need there. But I had never worked with a child with a hearing loss because typically in the past they were away. They were in a special school for children with hearing loss, and they were learning to communicate a different way than those of us in the hearing world do.
So even with all the major strides and steps of integration and inclusion in the disability world into the general community, the hearing world, the loss of hearing world was still being excluded?
In a way, it took changes in technology, such as cochlear implants or really high-powered hearing aids like digital hearing aids, in combination with the development of a new field of deaf education called auditory oral education, for the possibility of children with hearing loss to be really fully mainstreamed into community schools and to learn to listen and speak if their families choose for that to be the way that they communicate.
So families do have a choice as to whether they want to do this or not.
They do. And that's really why Hear Me Now was started, is because about 10 years ago there were a group of parents in Maine, southern Maine primarily, who had children with profound hearing loss, meaning they heard practically nothing. And they found out about cochlear implants, which allows children with very, very significant hearing loss to listen and hear things, and they knew that they wanted that choice for their child. They wanted their child to grow up listening and talking, and that choice was not available in Maine at that time. So they were forced to go out of state, Massachusetts primarily, most of them, to get not only the surgery that their child needed for the device, but also to get the after-surgery rehabilitative services, which is what Hear Me Now does, for their child. So they didn't want other families in the future to have to go through that, so they started Hear Me Now, beginning as an advocacy group, and then we've grown over the last 10 years so that we now are direct service providers, and we also provide a great deal of professional development to other people that are working with kids with hearing loss in Maine.
Are you the first executive director?
I'm not. I am the third, but I've been there for about 7 years out of the 10.
So you really have taken Hear Me Now from a grassroots organization basically to where it's at right now.
we've been able to grow the organization and grow our board from primarily people that were directly involved with childhood hearing loss to people who in the wider community that have more of an interest in the mission.
So what's been some of your frustrations, some of your issues that you've had to deal with as an executive director trying to move a small organization made up of end users and their families to one of a general board looking at it from a community perspective?
Well, I think it's getting that message out there, getting people to understand what's possible. You can say to people that a child with a hearing loss really is able to listen and speak and be educated along with their peers in their parents' community, but that's a hard thing for people to wrap their minds around, because it truly means that with the correct technology and with the appropriate rehabilitation, that kids can develop commensurate or alongside their hearing peers. They can learn to talk, and then based upon learning to talk and listen, then their literacy skills, they'll be able to read just like their hearing peers are. They can participate in theater. They can participate in music classes. They can participate in sports. Hearing and receiving information just like the rest of us in the hearing world do.
Explain what a cochlear implant is.
Without getting technical,
Without
which
getting
you've told me not to do. All right. There's a variety of ways.
I suggested you not to.
No, you're right. There's a variety of ways that people with hearing loss can have access to sound. And a cochlear implant is for people, both children and adults, who have very, very significant hearing losses. So basically, the whole outer and middle part of their ear don't work at all. So, which are the mechanical parts of our ear. So a cochlear implant bypasses all of the mechanical parts and goes directly, basically, into the brain, which is where the auditory nerve is. And the auditory nerve is what stimulates all those parts of our brains that help us to understand language through listening. So a cochlear implant has a microphone. It gathers sound, and it takes that sound, and it is a little tiny computer, right, that hangs on a person's ear, sort of like a hearing aid, that takes that sound and processes it. That little computer is called a speech processor. Processes it into a digital signal. That digital signal bypasses the whole ear, passes right into the auditory nerve as a digital signal, and the brain gets stimulated just like all that information and all that sound was going right through the person's regular ear. It's fascinating. And
I have to admit, you and I have known each other for 6 years, 6.5 years, and I've had the really good fortune of seeing some of these results. And there's two events that really stick out in my mind, okay? One is when your president was speaking to a group of potential donors, and his daughter, who is profoundly deaf, was standing behind him, facing out the window. So their two backs were facing each other around halfway across the room. And he starts talking about her, and she just turns around and says, "I heard you say that." I mean, I've never seen a group of people just dumbfounded that she actually heard with her deafness. And then the second one was when the children's concert of the Portland Symphony Orchestra did Peter and the Wolf out at the school. And that these kids who are profoundly deaf were listening and playing musical instruments with the symphony. It's just mind-boggling.
That was my hook that really got me to be interested in and to become passionate about working at Hear Me Now is music. I majored in music for a few years in college. I have a real deep personal connection with music, and the thought that I could be working for an organization that was helping kids and adults, late deafened adults who have so enjoyed music and have lost that common human experience that we all have, the enjoyment of music, to help bring that back to them, just is very, very meaningful to me.
That's great stuff. So, do you find resistance to your work from groups in the state or whomever?
Well, the history of deaf education and the development of auditory oral deaf education in particular has had a fair amount of resistance and drama associated with it. When the possibility or the choice of learning to listen for people with hearing loss first came about, it was very scary or disheartening to the deaf community that had worked for so many years to be recognized as people who had a culture within their disability. And so much of that culture was based upon the way that they communicated, that the thought that that people who were deaf would not need to use American Sign Language as a way to communicate with others and to embrace that very important part of their culture. There was a lot of controversy about it initially when it first started. But over time, there's been a lot more acceptance to the fact that it's really all about choice. And
I want to come back to that, but
Yeah.
we do have to take our mid break right now. And before we go into break, I ask all my guests a
Yes.
trivia question.
Okay.
And our disclaimer is you have not known this question before. And we try and have it somewhat relevant to what you're doing. So this is a multiple choice question.
good.
Okay. Over 50% of deaf adults earn less than $20,000, $25,000, or $30,000 per year. I'm going to do my mid break and you have a minute to think about it. This is David Unger, a nonprofit insider on WMPG 90.9 of Southern Maine and Eastern New Hampshire. Today we have Pam Dawson, Executive Director of Hear Me Now. All right, the minute's up.
Wow, that was a fast minute.
I speak quickly.
I'm going to say less than 25,000.
According to the Dallas Ear Institute, over 50% of adults earn less. Over 50% of deaf adults earn less than $25,000 per year.
I can explain that statistic, and I would actually like to have the opportunity to do that.
Let's take a vote. All in favor?
My guess is that statistic came from older adults. It's not taking into account the current generation of children who have had the opportunity to learn to listen and speak and are entering into adulthood. This is why. Typically, when a child used only American Sign Language, or now an adult used only American Sign Language as their way of communicating, then which is a separate and distinct language in its own right. And then they were learning how to read in English. There was often a lot of difficulty in basically being bilingual and having their literacy skills, their reading skills, be up with their hearing peers. So if you have low literacy, it's much more difficult for you to find a high-paying job. Happily, again, with the advent of the auditory oral education and the opportunity for kids to learn how to have their literacy skills be commensurate with their peers, that is no longer the case. I'm happy to report that almost all of the kids that we work with are not receiving really in-depth special education services around their reading at this time. They're doing great.
How many children are you in connection with or are part of your client base at this point?
Children themselves, probably about 60 under the age of 8, I would say. And then we also contract with about 22 different school systems within the state. So we're providing mostly professional supports, professional development to classroom teachers who have kids with hearing loss in their classrooms, speech pathologists who may be working with kids with hearing loss, resource room teachers, Then we also work with adults who have received cochlear implants through Mercy Hospital.
So your total client base would be about what?
Couple hundred, I would say.
And how many people are affected by loss of hearing in the state of Maine?
There's about 800 or 900 kids under the age of 18 with hearing loss in our state. And for adults, it, of course, really varies by age. And the older an adult gets, the higher percentage of people there are with hearing loss. But about 30% of adults under the age of 65 in our state have hearing loss. And there's about 1 million adults in our state. And then once people hit 75, then it's almost 50% of people that have some degree of hearing loss. So it's even though only about 3 in 1,000 children are born with hearing loss, children lose their hearing in childhood, and then as people get older, a lot more do. So it affects a lot more people than you would think.
So you're only touching a fraction of the potential.
Yes, especially until about 3 years ago when something very exciting happened at Hear Me Now. We figured out a way to work with children and families who are outside of our catchment area or outside of the place that we could actually drive to. We started using video teleconferencing equipment and the internet and have been working very successfully with children and their parents in every county in the state except 2. And don't ask me which 2. I can't remember. But that's our approach anyway, especially with really young children, is our providers, speech pathologists and teachers of the deaf, use a parent coaching approach. So what we're trying to do is take a hearing parent who already knows, obviously, how to listen and speak, and build on their skills as a parent and as a caregiver to facilitate opportunities for young children to learn how to listen and speak within their normal daily routines, within their play, just as part of their family life. So doing that through teletherapy has worked very, very well. We're coaching the parent who's interacting with the child, and it's opened up the possibility of fulfilling our mission of giving people opportunities in all parts of our state. It's been a very exciting thing.
So you're probably one of the few in the smaller nonprofit world who does this sort of telecommunicating.
Yes, there are other more medical models around the state that are using it, but I think in terms of using it to target a specific disability and a specific therapy, yes. Not in our state, yes, but nationwide.
I was just talking the state.
Okay,
but it's a pretty common practice. It's growing throughout the country.
It's really growing, and we've actually been fortunate to be a part of a national learning community and a national study, actually, on a comparative study looking at the traditional therapist goes into the home, works with the family, what are the child outcomes, what are the parent outcomes in terms of their ability to engage with their child, in terms of the quality of the interactions between the parent and child, and it's all good stuff, what's coming out of it.
I would guess that you still get a fair amount of resistance from the deaf community that's pretty entrenched in the culture of the deaf community, using American Sign Language and this whole new concept of being able to hear and giving people choice. I'm sure it has ruffled some feathers in the process.
Two things. I think everyone needs to keep in mind that it's about choice.
Right.
And
I used that word.
Yes, you did. And I think I can't think of a family right now of a child under the age of 5 that we're working with that is not also using sign language to some degree or another with their child. When they work with us, they're concentrating on listening and speaking, but it's not exclusionary. And it can be whatever a family feels that they need in order to meet their goals for their child. So I think that's the first point that is really important to make. And the second thing is I'm really happy to say that our state institution for deaf education, the Maine Educational Center for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing, is really working hard to collaborate with us to make sure that there is a really true continuum of services that are available to children and families across the state. We meet regularly to figure out ways that we can pool our resources, we can combine our talents, and be responsive to families and adults with hearing loss in this state.
Oh, that's great. It's major movement.
It is major movement. Certainly it's my hope as the Executive Director of Hear Me Now that the funds will follow, that collaborative effort and that goodwill. I know I'm sure every executive director that comes here and talks to you talks about funding as an issue. But we need to be recognized as an important resource in the state and to receive state funding as well.
So if you had to pick one program that you wanted to brag about, what would it be? We talked a lot of generalities.
Yeah. We have so many that I'm so proud of. I guess it would have to be our ability to work with families all over the state. The internet therapy that I was talking about has provided so many more families with the choice that we're all about. We've gotten grants to provide. We have a loaner inventory of tablet devices, iPad minis, that we're actually able to loan out to families. We ship them to them. We pay for their data plan. So our therapist is sitting in our office, connecting with a family at no cost to them and giving them the tools that they need so that they can have their child be part of their hearing community. And we're also using that same technology to work with professionals in school districts around the state, working with other speech pathologists who have a child with a hearing loss that's on their caseload. They are not completely comfortable, perhaps, with cochlear implants since they're kind of new, so we're able to coach and mentor other professionals. And it's very, very exciting. It's opened up a very large rural state to the expertise that we hold.
That's great. It's really exciting. And I've been watching, as you know, Hear Me Now for many, many years, and the progress that you've made is just phenomenal.
Thanks, David.
If you got into an elevator with one of the major philanthropists in Maine, and you had 30 seconds, what would you tell him about, or her about Hear Me Now, and why they should give to you?
I'm going to pretend they're a philanthropist that also really believes in the arts and music, too.
Okay.
Did you know that it's possible for a profoundly, profoundly deaf child or an adult to receive the technology and the rehabilitation that they need so that they can fully, fully participate in the hearing world, not just in terms of listening and talking as a way of communicating, but they can play a musical instrument, they can carry a tune, they can be a teenager wearing an iPod and rock out with all their friends and then talk about the lyrics. The future is almost limitless now for kids who have hearing loss in terms of what they can participate in.
And it still comes down to the choice of the child and the parents as to whether they want to go this route.
It does.
I've been asking you a lot of questions. Do you have any questions for me?
I want to thank you for doing this. And I listened to a few others too, and it's just so helpful for those of us that are out in the nonprofit community. We're small, we're struggling, we feel alone sometimes, and it's so nice to hear what we already know deep down, but that everyone else is on a similar journey, and in the end, we all feel it's worth it. So thanks for supporting us.
Well, it's our pleasure, and I wish we could do more. I mean, and there's a lot that people could do if they wanted to get involved